Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. And yes, I will be talking about every single defunct ride at Hersheypark. This only excludes the roller coasters and the fun houses, because those will each be their own videos later down the line. I'll be heavily relying on the Wikipedia article list of former Hersheypark attractions for most of my information, but I will get information from other sources here and there. This is mainly meant to be a video that's like listened to in the background of other things. Most of it will just be my logo like you see right now, but occasionally, if there's a picture for the ride I'm talking about, I'll put it on the screen. On the Wikipedia article, if you're familiar with that, I'll be going through the past thrill rides, past water rides, past kiddie rides, and some of the past attractions sections. The past attractions section has some things like a pool, which I don't really count, but some things like a theater, I'll count. So, without further ado, let's get on to every single former attraction at Hersheypark. So the first ride we have is Carousel from 1908. This was open from 1908 to 1912. This was the first ride at the park, and it was bought used, but it turned out to be a really large success for the park. Next was the Miniature Railroad, which was opened in 1910 and was the second ride purchased by the park, and closed in 1971. This was just like a typical railroad ride, but it was like restored in 2007 like the car, and now you can actually see it if you go in the gift shop on the way out of the park. It's right in front of Milton's Ice Cream Parlor, so there's a fun fact. The next ride was a new carousel. It was a much nicer one, much more expensive. It opened in 1912 and closed in 1944. This was the second carousel they had, and it was way better, obviously. But now, in 1944, they got a new one, which is the one we currently have at the park. Next up is the Scooter, which is a traditional bumper car ride. It's actually located right near the current bumper cars. That's about it. Opened in 1926 and closed in 1931. The next one's an interesting one. It was a dark ride called the Pretzel, made by the Pretzel Ride Company. It opened in 1931 and closed in 1963. It was a dark ride attraction. Like, Pretzel Ride Company made a bunch of dark rides, and based on their other dark rides, I'm guessing this was a haunted house, but I'm not 100% sure, and I can't exactly find a source to back that up, but I'm pretty sure this was a haunted house ride. So the next one is The Bug, opened in 1933 and closed in 1981. This was pretty much a larger version of the Ladybugs that we have now. It's where Wave Swinger is. Next up was an electric power car ride called Custer Car Ride, opened in 1936 and closed in 1945 due to the construction of the Comet. The next one is The Whip, opened in 1937, closed in 1975, not to be confused with the current Whip. This ride was moved a bunch. It was originally by Super Duper Looper. Then it was moved to where Flying Falcon used to be, which is where Frog Hopper and the Convoy currently are. And then I think it was moved again. It's been moved quite a lot, but then it closed, and now we have a new Whip. The next one is the Auto Scooters, opened in 1938 and closed in 1977. It was the second bumper car ride that they built. And it currently is the pizza place down in the hollow. That used to be where these bumper cars were. Next up is the Aerial Joyride, opened in 1941, closed in 1961. This was actually bought from the New York World's Fair, and it currently is where the Music Box Theater is. It was sort of Flying Scooters-ish ride, similar to Frontier Flyers. The next one was called Cuddle Up. It was opened in 1947 and closed in 1977. This was a teacup type ride, but it didn't the whole platform didn't spin. It was only just parts of the ride that spun. If you're familiar with Coal Shaker, which is a ride we'll get to later, it was pretty much the same thing as that. And it's right now located, I believe, by near where the Triple Towers are. Next up, we have the twin Ferris wheels, not to be confused with the giant wheel, which is the more iconic double Ferris wheel. These were opened in 1950 and closed in 1974. These were pretty much just two Ferris wheels side by side, right about where Super Duper Looper is now. Next we have Turnpike, opened in 1960, closed in 1973. This was pretty similar to the current ride Twin Turnpike, except it was down in the hollow and it ran over the river that's down there. It was partially damaged by a 1972 flood, which I'll talk about a few more times in this video, but it was open for one more year until it was removed in 1973. Following this up was Flying Coaster, opened in 1964 and closed in 1972. This was a ride similar to, I believe, Kangaroo at Kennywood, where you basically went in a circle and your car occasionally jumped up. And the Wikipedia article says it's now a midway. I'm not exactly sure where in the park it was, though. Following this was Gold Nugget, opened in 1964, closed in 1972. This replaced the Pretzel, the dark ride I talked about earlier, and it was another dark ride. Based on the outside, I'm guessing it was themed to mining, but I'm not confident with that. And next was Tip Top, opened in 1966, closed in 1979. This was originally down in the hollow and then relocated up by near Golden Nugget, which I believe was by where Fender Bender is. And it just kind of looks like just a typical spinning ride. Like there's a big platform that spins and the cars spin, but I'm not 100% confident, but based on the pictures, that's what I assume it was. Next up was Paratrooper, opened in 1967 and closed in 1979. This was obviously a Paratrooper type ride, and it's where the amphitheater is. Okay, next was Roundup, opened in 1968, closed in 1977. This is a pretty common type of ride you see at like fairs, and there's also one at like Great Adventure. It's basically where you stand up and it spins and then like tilts on its side. This was where Gold Nugget was, and it's in modern day Founder's Way. Next was Magic Carpet Giant Slide, opened in 1969 and closed a few years later in 1972. This was a large slide similar to Mary Dairy Dip Fun Slide, which I'll be talking about later. It also was located near where the amphitheater currently is. Next up is Rotor, opened in 1970 and closed in 1994. This is about where the Skyrush station is today, and it's pretty similar to the Gravitron type ride you see at many fairs, where you could like spun a bunch and then you were like stuck to the wall. Following this was Monster, opened in 1972, closed in 1983. This is a pretty typical octopus style ride, and it was also, I believe, down by where Skyrush currently is. Next was the iconic Giant Wheel, opened in 1973, closed in 2004. This was a Ferris wheel ride with one arm that was up, but while the other arm was loading, and they switched. This allowed the ride to have a pretty large capacity. Next up was Skyride, opened in 1974, closed in 1991. This was a transportation skyride that took you from about the modern day entrance. The station still stands, and as of right now, there's like dancing characters outside of it most times. And took you to the Great Bear Station. This was closed due to Great Bear, and the ride still operates in Thailand in Dreamworld Park. Next is Himalaya, opened in 1975 and closed in 1989. This is what Mini Himalaya is named off of, and it was originally down by the current Hollow Pizza place, but it was moved due to Super Duper Looper's construction, and it then moved to by the entrance of Zoo America, and it was replaced by Flying Falcon. Next up is Coal Shaker, opened in 1978, closed in 1989. This was pretty much the same thing as Cuddle Up. It was in the same location, but now it was indoors and it had coal-themed cars. Next up is Flying Bobs, opened in 1978 and closed in 1982. This replaced the Twin Tower Toboggan ride, which I will be talking about in my coaster video, and it was basically a ride where you're like below towards the ground and you spin in a circle. There's one currently at Cedar Point. Next is Rodeo, opened in 1978 and closed in 2008. This ride was pretty much a normal spinning ride, except it like tilted a bit. It was moved a few times throughout the park and was eventually moved to Dutch Wonderland. Cyclops was opened in 1980 and closed in 2002. This was a pretty typical Enterprise type ride, and it was replaced by the Claw in 2002. And apparently it currently resides in Callaway Park in Canada. Next was Conestoga, opened in 1984 and closed in 2002. This was a Huss Rainbow, and if you're not familiar with those, you basically like sit in a seat and then it goes like up and down in a large circle, but you don't actually like go upside down. It was themed to you like sat in a Conestoga wagon, and it is where the Howler currently is. Next up, Timber Rattler, opened in 1984, closed in 1987. This was another octopus type ride, but it was like a different kind. I'm not exactly sure where in the park it was, but it was replaced by Rodeo, because it moved a few times. Next was Frontier Meeting House, opened in 1987 and closed in 1989. This is where the Playdome arcade currently is, and you can actually still see a chandelier from this ride on the ceiling of that arcade. And it was sort of a maintenance nightmare. It was like an upside down house type ride, and not many people rode it, and the maintenance was not good, so that's why it only lasted 2 years. Next up is the first ride I've actually been on this list, and it's Flying Falcon, opened in 1990 and closed in 2016. This was like a ride where there were 7 cars attached to the end of a large arm, and 4 arms in total, and like you went up and it all spun around, and you get pretty nice views of the park. It went about 100 feet up and was closed due to the Triple Towers relocating kiddie rides to where Flying Falcon was. Next is Chaos, opened in 1999, closed in 2005. This was a Chance Chaos ride, which is basically a ride that like spun and like tilted, and then like the seats actually moved freely. And it was closed in 2005 due to the water park being built, and it's where Coastline Plunge is right now. And the final ride in the thrill rides category is Reese's Extreme Cup Challenge, opened in 2006 and closed in 2018. This was a ride I was on quite a few times, and it was a shooting ride where you got into 2 cars, either chocolate or peanut butter, and you had to shoot at targets, and whichever car got the most points won. This was replaced by Reese's Cup Fusion, an upgraded version, but you can still find a target from Reese's Extreme Cup Challenge in the ride. A ride not listed on the Wikipedia article is Mary Dairy Dip Fun Slide. This was located right next to where Laugh Track is, and it was taken out but not really replaced with anything, and all that stands in its place is just some mulch and trees. Moving on to the water ride section, the first ride is Chute, opened in 1914 and closed in 1923. This was a toboggan style slide where basically you were up a hill and then you went down a hill and splashed into the water below. This ride fell into disrepair in 1923 and was eventually replaced with another pretty much identical ride called Chute in 1924, and it was closed in 1928, and it was essentially the same thing except slightly updated. The ride Mill Chute opened in 1929 and closed in 1962 due to a retheme to Lost River, which I'll be talking about later. This was pretty much just a dark ride that ended with a splashdown in the water, and it was located around the creek that Great Bear currently runs next to. Next is Bike Boats, opened in 1931 and closed in 1941. This was a typical paddleboat ride, and it was located in the aforementioned creek next to where Great Bear currently is. You could just ride freely around in the lake, and this won't be the last time a ride like this occurs. Next is Giant Toboggan Slide, which was sort of a successor to Chute due to its popularity. It was a pretty similar ride, not exactly sure of all the ride details, but it was closed in 1941, apparently due to America's entry into World War II. Speedboat was opened in 1933 and closed in 1941. This was a speedboat ride in an area that is now actually not part of Hersheypark in a creek, and it was also closed due to America's entry into World War II. The ride Lucas Motorboat Ride opened in 1949 and closed in 1971. This was a ride where Lucas Company kiddie motorboats were put in a water trough, and it was closed due to Carousel Circle being built. Lost River was the retheme of Mill Chute, and was pretty much the same ride, except now it had jungle theming. This was destroyed in the 1972 flood I talked about earlier due to Tropical Storm Agnes. Next, Paddleboats opened in 1982 and closed in 2006. This was a ride that costed extra, but it's essentially the same thing as bike boats, as it was just paddle boats running in Spring Creek, which is the creek next to Great Bear. Next is the popular Canyon River Rapids, opened in 1987 and closed in 2006. This was a typical river raft ride, but it was closed due to a 2009 expansion of the boardwalk, which had the wave pool and the lazy river. And a lot of the boats for this ride are actually still used in Kennywood for their river raft ride. Next, Frontier Shootout was opened in 1988 and closed in 1998. This was just a pair of typical water slides where you rode in like a raft. One was named Slide Winder and the other Pistol Pete's Plunge. This was remodeled and then known as Western Shootout, which opened in 1999 and closed in 2007. This was essentially the same thing, except the slides were rebuilt and upgraded. Pistol Pete's Plunge was renamed Straight Shooters, and Slidewinder was renamed to Winding Rivers. These were both located right where Fahrenheit currently is, and they were moved due to the construction of Fahrenheit. The final ride here is Tiny Timbers, a ride I remember being on. It was opened in 1989 and closed into 2013 due to Coco Cruiser. This was a miniature log flume ride where you just went through a few turns and went up a 7-foot hill and dropped down into the water below. I recall this actually getting you pretty wet despite the short drop, and especially if you had a lot of people, it could get you even wetter than the normal log flume. Another extra ride not listed on the Wikipedia article is a surfing ride that was at the boardwalk at one point. I'm not sure exactly when it closed. I think it may have been 2020 or 2021, but it was basically you went on a board and then like there were waves and you had to surf on it. This was just replaced by a bunch of picnic benches that currently sit there, so I'm not sure if they're planning on adding something there, but it was sort of quietly closed, similar to Mary Dear Dip Fun Slide. The next section is the past kiddie rides. These rides here have a little less information known on them, and there will be most likely fewer pictures and less information. But the first ride is Aeroplane Swing, opened in 1926 and closed around 1960. This was just a typical airplane swing ride, as the title indicates, and it was one of the two first kiddie rides that the park purchased. The other of the park's first two kiddie rides is another Ferris Wheel, opened in 1926 and closed again around 1960. This was just a mini kiddie Ferris Wheel around where the Skyview loading station is. Apparently his second kiddie Ferris Wheel was built in its last 2 seasons, but then both of them closed in 1960. Next is Sailboats, opened in 1929 and closed in 1975. This was just a kiddie boat ride where there were just some boats in the water and then they just moved in a circle. It was originally where Swing Thing is today, but then moved to where Ladybug is today, and then it was taken out due to the opening of Ladybug in 1975. Next is Automobile, opened in 1935 and closed in 1975. This ride was just a ride that there were 10 cars and they moved in a small circle, similar to Traffic Jam, except it was like a single file line. It was about where Fender Bender is, then it was moved to near Ladybug, and it was most likely taken out due to Ladybug. Next is Horse and Buggy, opened in 1949, closed in 1971. This was just another circle ride that just happened to have a horse and buggy, similar to the current ride Pony Parade. Next is a bit of an interesting one. Miniature Train, opened in 1952 and closed in 2014, but the dates are a bit misleading. It was basically just a typical miniature train ride where you just rode in it and it just went around in a large oval. It was originally near where Comet's exit is from 1952 to 1971. Then it was taken out for 12 years, then reintroduced for only Christmas in Candy Lane, and from 1983 to 1995. Then it was reintroduced to the park full-time near where Laugh Track currently is from 1996 to 2014, but then it was taken out due to the addition of Laugh Track. And I'm not 100% sure how accurate this is, but according to the Wikipedia article, quote, it will be reintroduced in a future season. Next is Kiddie Turnpike, opened in 1955 and closed in 1967. This, like the name implies, was a kiddie version of the turnpike located in the Kiddieland area, like many of these kiddie rides are. Next is Ferris Wheel, opened in 1959, closed in 1971. This was another kiddie Ferris wheel ride, and it was located yet again near the fender bender, and it was removed due to the addition of the area der Dijkplaats. Next is the Outboard Motorboats, opened in 1962 and closed in 1984. This was yet another kiddie boat ride, and it was moved quite a few times throughout its history, but it ended up being replaced by the Granny Bugs, and the Granny Bugs actually ended up using the motor from this ride. Next was Wells Cargo, opened in 1964, closed in 2003. This was a mini whip ride, and it was originally operated where the Skyview station was, then it was relocated to the Pioneer Frontier area, and then it was moved to Dutch Wonderland in 2003. The next is one I'm not exactly clear about. It's called Little Red Caboose and was apparently opened in 1970 and closed in 1970, and it was a caboose that the park purchased, which, you had to pay 10 cents to get in or ride. I'm not exactly sure. But then they removed the price and no longer considered it a ride, so I don't understand exactly what this is. If you guys know anything about it, please say something in the comments, because I'm not sure. Next was Earthmovers. Opened in 1976, closed in 2002, and it was renamed Tiny Tanks the year after, from 1976 to 1979. So, it was just a simple bulldozer ride where the mini pirate currently is, and it was also moved to Dutch Wonderland. Next were the mini Skooters, opened in 1978 and closed in 1995. This was a kiddie bumper car ride, and it was replaced with Rolling Rovers, which is under the fender bender where Skee Ball currently is. Next is another weird one, Little Wheel, opened in 1983 and closed in 1983. This was apparently a trailer with a mini Ferris wheel on it, and it was open for the park's first Christmas in Candyland and was never seen again. Next is Moonwalk, opened in 1996, closed in 2007. This is just pretty much a bouncy house ride, and it wasn't exactly a ride even, but it was originally added to the Midway tent, but then it was eventually moved to only the Christmas Candyland event inside of Santa's Castle, which was a retheme of the Overlook Arcade. The same goes for Tiger's Tail, which was opened in 2000 and closed in 2007. This was just an inflatable crawl-through that was, again, put in the Midway tent, and then, after the 2003 season, moved to only Christmas in Candyland, and it was just part of Santa's Castle. The third ride that was in the Midway tent was Crazy Climber, opened in 2000 and closed in 2005. This was a jungle gym, rope climbing course for kids. It was also in the Midway tent for a few years longer, but it was removed following the 2005 season. A kiddie ride that isn't listed on the Wikipedia article, but I have brought it up a few times, is Rolling Rovers, which was basically just sort of a pit with a few scooters in it, and kids could ride around. I was on this a handful of times, and it's located under the fender bender where there's currently some skee ball. Now we're on to our final category, past attractions. This, as I mentioned in the intro, has a lot of different things. Some I will not count and some I will count. For example, the Hersheypark Athletic Field and the Hersheypark Pool I won't be counting. But the first one on here that I do count is the Hersheypark Shooting Gallery, opened in 1908 and closed in 1930. This was a typical shooting gallery that is located where the fender bender currently is, and it was replaced by the Pretzel dark ride, which I talked near the beginning of the video. The next two are two mini golf courses. One was Miniature Golf Course and Driving Range, opened in 1931 and closed in 1971. This is, as the title indicates, a miniature golf course and a driving range that is located on what is currently Chocolate World. The other is Fairways Mini Golf, opened in 1960 and closed in 1970, and it's located near the current Hersheypark Arena. Next is the Gold Nugget Shooting Gallery, opened in 1973 and closed in 1977. This is the thing that replaced the Gold Nugget Dark Ride, and it was just a normal shooting gallery. But then it was replaced with the ride Fender Bender. Next is something that I probably wouldn't consider a ride, but I think it's funny. It was Dogpatch Dawgs, opened in 1980 and closed in 1993. This was, according to the Wikipedia article, an audio animatronic band of 5 dogs that appeared in a gazebo in Pioneer Frontier. I don't know, it's just funny. Next is Shooting Gallery. Another shooting gallery opened in 1980 and closed in 1985. This was a shooting gallery located in the Rhineland section of the park. It's now used for hospitality services. Following this was Cinemavision, opened in 1982 and closed in 1985. This was a theater attraction which had panoramic films shown on a floor-to-screen ceiling. But I'm not exactly sure what films they showed here. Next was Miniature Golf, opened in 1982, closed in 1997. This was a small mini golf course located near Super Duper Looper, and it was removed due to the installation of Great Bear. And the final attraction I'll be talking about in this video is the Frontier Virtual Theater, opened in 2003 and closed in 2007. This was a virtual reality game that apparently had 3 rows of bench-like seats where people wore VR glasses and had to do stuff like stomping their feet and yelling. And it was a sort of game. It replaced Conestoga, and it was replaced itself by the Howler. Thank you all so much for sitting through this long video and making it all the way to the end. I had a fun time going through every single ride that closed, and if there's anything that I or the Wikipedia article missed, please leave it down in the comments and tell me. Also, keep a lookout for my former coasters and former fun houses of Hersheypark videos that will be coming at some time in the future. Thank you all so much, and have a great day.